Great. Welcome everyone to another session of the CHIWORK Symposium on Human Computer Interaction for Work. Today we have Professor Tanja van der Lippe of Utrecht University as a guest. And before I introduce her, let me tell you a little bit about CHIWORK. In this series, we have weekly conversations with experts on various aspects of the future of work. The general chairs are Andrew Kuhn and Orit Scheer, and technical program chairs are Anna Cox, Sneha Kumar, Helena Mentis, and myself. I'm Chris Janssen. We have a fantastic team of volunteers that create these series, and you can find out more about them and about future CHIWORK sessions on www.chiwork.org. You can also enroll there for receiving emails about all the sessions that we have. That way the calendar invite automatically gets into your inbox. I mentioned we have many volunteers today. Because I keep forgetting it, I want to especially point out Alberta Anta, who is helping me each week to make the conversations run very smoothly. She's behind the scenes collecting all kinds of information from our speakers that it gets on the website and helping me with the recording. So thank you, Alberta. We are recording these talks. They will be on our YouTube channel. That said, we do love to see you. So if you are in a position where you can turn on your camera, we'd love to see you, to have a sense of community feeling. Know that only the people who talk will be on the recording. So if you don't talk, we can still wave and see you, and it's nice for the conversation feel. Today's format will include a 30-minute conversation with Professor van der Lippe, which will include questions from you, from the audience. And those questions will be handled by Anna Cox, who's also here with us. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. We will monitor those, or Anna will monitor them today. And then once we're at the stage with the Q&A with the audience, we will give the floor to you. With that long introduction, let's introduce our guest of today. It's an absolute pleasure to have Professor Tanja van der Lippe here. She's been on my list for a long time to try to get her over, and we managed, so I'm super happy. She's a professor of sociology of household and labor relations at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And she's also the chair of the Department of Sociology, and she's involved in the research school ICS on Inter-University Center for Social Science Theory and Methodology. Within Utrecht, she's also one of the coordinators of our local Future of Work Hub, within our bigger strategic theme about institutions for an open society. And Professor van der Lippe has won many prestigious grants and acknowledgements, including the biggest European grant, I think, ERC Advanced Grants, for her research into investigating a sustainable workforce in Europe. And she's also a co-PI on one of the biggest Dutch grants, the NWO Gravitation Grant on Sustainable Cooperation. She's also a member of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the Royal Dutch Society of Sciences. She wrote recently a popular science book in Dutch about time pressure that started before the COVID pandemic, but it was being written during the COVID pandemic as well. So she also wrote about that. And we will be talking mostly about topics that she covers in the book during today's conversation. So with all that, welcome, Tanja. Good to have you here. In your recent Dutch book about time pressure, you studied subjective and objective time pressure and how this has changed over the years. Can you tell us in a nutshell, well, what is then time pressure and where does it come from?
Well, Chris, first of all, thank you for this wonderful introduction of me. Wow, because I feel honored to be here and to tell something and discuss also my work with you, but I'm also interested in your work. So hopefully we can have a discussion about that as well. Okay, yeah, what is time pressure? Well, maybe the following sound familiar, that we're trying to juggle all our activities at work, at home, in our spare time, and we go from one activity to the next without time to relax. And that is, although some 50 years ago, only 50 years ago, it was expected that we should be now in the so-called leisure society due to technological advances, where we work only half of the time, so 6 months out of 12, 2 days out of 5. But well, that has not become true. We are now living in a 24/7 society. And I indeed have written a book, and I do already many years research into time use and time pressure, because I'm interested in that, because we all have the same amount of time, but how we spend it is so different between people. So we can learn from that in terms of inequality. And I measure objective time pressure and subject time pressure. And what we often see in the literature, that when people focus on time pressure, they study subjective time pressure, and that is feelings of time pressure, so how you perceive it. But I say it's also important to look at the objective time pressure, the obligations you have. So the time you spend on paid work, on domestic work, care, education, etc. And what we see then is that families with young children have a high objective and subject time pressure. But for example, youngsters, well, they really feel busy nowadays, stressed also, but their objective time pressure is not that high. Now, where does it come from? I give 3 factors. I'm a sociologist, I remember, so I know that I'm in a different community at this moment. I like that. The first one is that we want to do so much that we simply can't fit it all in. And that is due to our schedules, our timetables, how our society is organized. And remember that years ago, we had a full-time housewife, and she took care of her husband when he came home from work. But now we don't have that housewife anymore, but 2 working people in the house, if you have a partner, of course. So that makes people busy. The second factor is that we not only do a lot, but we also have to do a lot. Not only in our jobs, but also outside work. We get our identity from our work. We used to get that more from religion, but religion has become less relevant nowadays, and we get status from being busy. So being busy is a mark of status. And I like to give here the example of Sally. An experiment in the US has been done with 2 Sallys. And the first Sally says on Friday during the break, well, I can take a break because I have time to do that. And Friday afternoon, she leaves already at 4:30 because her work is done. So she can enjoy the weekend. And then there is the other Sally then, and she doesn't have time to take a lunch break because there is too much work to be done. And at 5 o'clock, she can't enjoy the weekend because she has to work the whole evening to finish her job. And then the respondents are asked who has the most important job and who has the most status. Well, what do you guess? They all say the second Sally. But you could also say that the first Sally has organized her life in a very nice way, in a very good way. So, but this is how we focus on time pressure. And then the third factor, Chris, is that we in fact can do a lot. So modern technology means we are always switched on. We are contactable 24/7. We can access information at any time, at any place, etc. Well, you can imagine that makes us busy as well.
Yeah,
so that is
the last point is maybe something that towards the end, when we get to the Q&A, given that we have human-computer interaction researchers, I think that's where I thought we can really have an exchange of what we as a community can do of human-computer interaction. One thing I like when I was reading your book that was intriguing to me, because as a psychologist, I tend to think of the individual more. And you rightfully pointed out, like, well, that's where a lot of the talk in the media, at least, is about, right? That you have to improve your life. Why don't you do self-management, time management? And I like the emphasis you placed as a sociologist, logical, but relatively novel to me about, well, what the dynamics of the group is. And I was particularly intrigued by this notion of a societal rhythm, how as a society we seem to have a rhythm that keeps us in place. And you tied it, of course, particularly to the Dutch audience. I was wondering, is this really us Dutch, or is this broader? But can you tell a little bit about that societal rhythm that you wrote about?
Yeah. First, the part on, of course, time pressure is also an individual problem, but I argue it is also a social problem. So these self-help books are nice, of course, but we need, if we see it as a problem, because sometimes time pressure can be also, sometimes it is good to work really hard. When you finish a deadline on time, you feel really good. But to solve the issue of time pressure, we need to see it also as a social problem. Now, this collective rhythm, yeah, maybe I can give an example that parents like to eat together with their kids every time or every day on the same time. We do that, especially in the Netherlands. So 85% of our dinner is consumed at the same time at 6 p.m. That is what we do in the Netherlands. So we do that also more than, I know, my own research showed that in the United States, for example. And it ensures regularity in our own lives, and it makes our life easier. But it also implies, of course, because when we all have this collective rhythm, that there are more traffic jams at the same time, because we all travel at the same times, etc. And now this collective rhythm, that is part of the problem, because that has become a problem, actually, because we no longer do things, or we do that less at set times. So we can now do our grocery shoppings, for example, well, the whole day. We can do it online. We can watch a television series at any moment of the day. So this collective rhythm is less visible, and that makes our life more difficult. That is also due to our flexible schedules, of course. Now, we have found, or we believe we have found, several ways to cope with that. 4 ways. And it is, you could say, it is to be efficient, to get more out of our time, to have it more efficient. That is the fragmentation of activities. So when you go to your work, you check your email. When you are in the train, you again check your email. You phone your kids, etc. So we have a lot of small tasks to do during the day. Then the next one is, and we think we can make more out of. We can get more out of time in this way. The next one is that we are multitasking. Well, I don't need to explain that here. The third one is that we increase the pace of what we are doing. So and we have seen that, of course, because we are all the time online. And the fourth one is that we change activities which we think takes a lot of time. For example, being a member of a sport clubs to an activity that takes less time. For example, jogging on your own. But since you can plan that on every time of the day and on any moment you want, it makes you less efficient. And all these things, well, we have the idea that we can make more out of our time. In the end, that makes us feel more pressured.
Yeah, because we have to now all of a sudden manage more, instead of that rhythm is really determined for us, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, which I have a couple of questions that I want to touch on, like what's the most natural follow-up, but maybe it is about COVID though, because talking of a disruption of rhythm, this pandemic, of course, this disrupted a lot, and you collected data before and during the pandemic. So how has that changed time pressure. I mean, we've all experienced it, but what is your scientific perspective on it?
Yeah, so during COVID, it was the idea that you have more time available, because you have less things to do. But when I look at the 3 factors I mentioned, then we see that we still wanted to do a lot. We still want to do a lot. There's no time to relax. So we found new hobbies. So we cannot relax and don't do anything. In working from home, we have seen, that is interesting. Maybe I can elaborate a bit on that, because we have seen many differences. So young families, they have become more busier because schools were closed. But older people, well, like me, I'm already quite old. I have children, but they don't live at home anymore. So I was able to plan my work at any time I wanted. So for me, it was more easy to work from home. So I feel less pressured. But I want to go one step back here, because I want to say something about working from home here as well. Because we studied that before COVID and also during COVID. And what we see in the literature is that working from home, so using your telework, using your computer technological devices to work from home, it is, and that is related to performance and to well-being, to work-life balance, etc. But it is also always focused on as an individual activity. And of course, when you work from home, then you have more autonomy, you have more focus on your work tasks, but also there are drawbacks that work is never finished, that there are blurring boundaries between work and family life, that you might have the feeling that you need to put extra effort in because you are allowed to work from home. So your manager allows you to work from home. And then there might also be professional isolation. That is what we experienced also during COVID-19, of course, this professional isolation. But we argue that working from home is not only an individual activity, but it is also dependent on what your colleagues are doing. So are they also working from home? Well, that happened a lot in COVID-19 times, of course. And this, and it sounds logical, because colleagues help each other. There's social exchange. You know these theories about social exchange. There's also interaction and communication, and you get inspired by your colleagues, and you develop norms together. And when your child is sick, and you both are at the workplace, and then you can discuss that with your colleague, and you go home early. Now, when you're all on the screen like we are now, that has changed. So there's less commitment to each other. But the role of the colleagues was not, well, it sounds so logical, but it was not visible in research before. And that was because there were no data available. And maybe I can elaborate also, you started with the COVID question, but maybe I can elaborate a bit on the data, Chris, is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, because I'm very proud actually about this part. So in the ERC Advanced, we were with a big group and we collected data in 9 countries in Europe, in the Netherlands. I started with the Netherlands, the UK, Sweden, Finland, Portugal, Spain, Hungary and Bulgaria and Germany. And we had a nested design where we collected information from employees nested in teams in organizations. So we have information from 11,000 employees nested in nearly 900 teams. And the manager also filled in a survey, and in 260 work organizations. So we have a lot of information, and that allowed us to test the effect or the influence. It is not a causal study, but test the influence of colleagues on your functioning when you work from home. Now, what did it show? What is that when a higher percentage of colleagues work from home, then there is less performance, more work-family conflict. And we also asked the manager about the performance of the whole team, and he or she is also not very happy when everyone is working from home, because the performance is less. Now, what does it imply for now? Because we haven't seen these studies yet. And so we are working from home, and the expectation is that we will continue to work at least half of our time at home, also when we are done with COVID-19, because we see the advantages. But the drawback, of course, is that, yeah, so for now we don't see maybe the difference in performance between working or not working from home. But in time, in a number of years, it might become true that we get less inspired, less innovation, because we don't have a chat, we don't have coffee with each other. And the problem is, I think that we now have coffee together. Well, that's also why I like to be here, that we have coffee together on the screen with people you normally know. But when you have coffee at the workplace, you also see the people you don't know. So, and there you are inspired by these people. So we need to still see what the consequences are of working from home for time pressure in the longer run. But for now, I would say that more than half of our time would not be a good idea. Okay, Chris, back to you.
And so this already touched, I think, on the sustainable workforce, right? Some of the points you wanted. Good. Because I want to move towards opening up the floor to the audience as well, because I think, I mean, I had a question for Tanja. What can we do as HCI researchers? But maybe we can ask her as well. I have this idea. Does that make sense? So I hope there could be a bit of an exchange with the audience. One thing I found intriguing on that regard in your book, and you already touched upon it in the previous answers, was how we think of the youth. So youth working from home, there's this inherent idea like, oh, they're tech savvy, they will flourish in their new jobs. But you had a nice insight that maybe you can elaborate a bit on why that might not be the case. Yeah, thank you. And then I come back also to this to the human interaction question, because I thought about it actually, because I was going to see you, so I want to learn. I have questions for you as well. But first about the youngsters, so they have grown up with technology, and there are advantages, but also disadvantages. And I give 4 of them. And that is maybe more the disadvantages. So why they feel stressed. So subjective time pressure, not objective time pressure, is they will do anything to be reachable. And they're on social media, constant, and also social media use subtle and clever methods, such as push notifications, which are difficult for people, young people especially, to ignore. Now, this is true more for young people because they have grown up with technology. So for them, it is more difficult to, for me, it's easier not to use my iPhone, but for young people, it's really, well, that shows research, more difficult. Then second, young people not only have to respond to messages, but they also have to process a lot of information every day. There's no time to take a good look at everything. So the information is scanned only, and that makes you feeling more busy. Now, third, what creates pressure is that young people constantly compare themselves with each other on social media on the basis of messages and posts. And this online self-representation, I don't know if you do anything with that, but I think it is a fantastic line of research. It's not my research, but I think it is very important, this research. And it seems that especially girls feel good when their posts are liked, retweeted,
and shared. And then fourth, and that is more sociological, young people also feel busier because they feel that they have to do better in their careers than their parents, than the previous generation. But maybe this is the first generation where that is not possible anymore. So the expectations of young people today is that the expectation that they internalize until they have the idea that they want it themselves, to have a good education, a nice job, and that gives them a lot of time pressure because it is, well, for this generation, for the new generation, it is more difficult to have a better position than their parents. So that is related to your question. And then
I was even thinking of another point you make.
Oh, okay, good.
Which I found too good not to share, which was this insight that because they're on the job, they're not there. They are not ingrained yet in all the processes, maybe, right? If there's online working, but you haven't been on site and you know everyone that you work with. So definitely in Utrecht, I expect this holds for everyone. We have new colleagues that started briefly before or during the pandemic, right? But they know some of the colleagues, but not all the colleagues and all the routines and who to reach out for. So despite that they can easily reach you through the tech, they don't know actually, well, what are the routines or the norms or the people to reach.
Yeah, that's a very good point,
so
Chris.
That was your point.
Yeah, I call that social and professional isolation.
Yeah.
And that is especially true for the young people. For older people, although you might imagine that they don't like working home because they're less used to technology, it appears to be the other way around, indeed. So young people who started their career, they want to come to the office to meet other people.
Yeah. Now we'll have to move to the audience Q&A at some point, but I do want to hear your thoughts on
because I've thought about
this. We can contribute. Yes.
I don't know, because you might do that. So you're doing human computer interaction. So it is the human and computer. But do you also take into account that there is at the same time the interaction between humans? So what I now told you about working from home, and your colleagues are also working from home. And so employees are part of a team, individuals are members of a household. So maybe you already do this, but I would like to hear your research.
I think members of the community, this will depend a bit. I don't know. I should watch out what I say on the recording. There's a difference whether we call ourselves computer-human interaction or human-computer interaction. Which one is put first, the human or the computer? And some of us have their preferences, whether we care a bit more about the human or about the computer. So I think the people who, a couple of them are in the audience, who care a lot about the human, they do look at that a bit more. Yes. But I still think it's interesting how these sociological constructs or norms, things that are where the technology is a contributor, how much dependence there is with the society as a whole, or with things that are outside of the tool itself. And now on the one hand, that's sort of depending upon it, but also shaping it, right? That the tech sets new expectations, new norms, or there are norms that the technology can or cannot help. But maybe other people can later comment on that better than I can. Yes.
Is that a question to me or not?
No, it's a question to the audience to respond to later, because they might have way better insights than me as an individual. Anna, do we already have questions from the audience? Because maybe we can cover some of those then.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a question here from Patricia. Do you want to read out your question?
Yeah, sure. So I was wondering if in your research, when you were looking at people working from home, did you also look at the different levels in experience? Because usually people who are just starting, not just starting a new job, but also starting like a new job at a new location where they have to kind of meet new people, but when they have to really also learn the job new, like, for example, I was talking to a lot of PhD students. They found it really hard to start in the pandemic because there were so many things they didn't know, and it was hard to reach out to people, obviously, but they also had this kind of feeling that they cannot reach out. They have to kind of really look for hours and hours to find the answer themselves, and then only reach out to like days later when they've wasted loads of time instead of like asking someone who could answer this question in like a minute. So did you also look at those differences in experience?
Yeah. That's a very good point, because that is what we see now. Indeed, we studied in this big survey, which was before COVID-19, but we studied this, and we indeed see that especially young people, so when they start a job, as you say, that they don't know, that they feel insecure in their job, and they need a community to ask to ask their questions. And what I've seen is, so we have these different experience levels, but then before COVID-19, and it would be most interesting to have it now as well. And what I have seen is that more research is coming into the role of the manager now, because that is not only it is not only the employee and his or her colleagues, but also the manager is more important. But we didn't learn managers what to do when people are working from home. So we have done a study into this, and they see that what they experience is that they have less control when their employees work from home. So I think I can imagine, we don't know yet, but I can imagine that a lot of new research is needed in this direction, because we will continue working from home part of the week, as I said, that I expect that. But we don't know yet how, I'm afraid that many managers don't know yet how to cope with that. So yeah. And the other one, I did a survey in, actually that was more my Hungarian colleague, a study into working from home and what does to your well-being during COVID-19. It is published in PLOS ONE, and what you see is that there are so many differences. So there is not one story you can tell. So there's also not one analysis you can do, because it is so different for different people in different situations. Yeah. Thank you for your question, Patricia.
Thank you.
And can I ask you then, Patricia, because now I know you, do you study the interaction between humans when you do human-computer interaction?
So I personally look more into humans with computers. So I'm looking into haptic interaction. So seeing like what kind of haptic feedback do we have and how do people respond to that, but more just with one human, to be honest. So for me personally, it's more one at the moment. Okay. But I'm also interested in kind of looking at how do people use that, use kind of, especially regarding to this question with like mental health, how do people use online technology and online resources for mental health? And that would also be a very much community thing, because that is one of the important aspects in that. So I'm interested in that, but not doing as much right now.
Nice.
So Tanja, I was interested in this idea about thinking about how the technology might help us to overcome this problem that you were talking about, particularly about people who might be new to an organization or new to working at all, and they kind of need to get to know other people and build those relationships. And you know, for a long time we've used technology to help us to strengthen relationships, right? And here is a prime example of where we're using technology to create new relationships. We're all getting to know you through the use of technology. And certainly I've seen examples from some organizations of where they're trying to really think about how they might be able to use the technology in these ways. And they're doing things like having coffee dates where each month you get randomly allocated a colleague and you have to find a time to have a 15-minute chat with them. And it's all opt-in, which is good, because otherwise it'd be horrible, wouldn't it, if you were forced into doing this. But you know, like, that seems to be a practice, I suppose, that seems to have really evolved over the last couple of years, which I think beforehand I hadn't really heard about people doing that so much. And I wonder whether in your work you've heard of any of these kind of new practices that have sort of evolved over the last couple of years, where people are trying to use the technology to solve this new problem.
Yeah, it is interesting, because it is as if technology in my field, sociology, it just happens. And so I think it would, because I think the idea you're proposing is wonderful. I would say, you now say new practices, but I think the research question could be here: under what conditions can technology be profitable for decreasing time pressure? I don't think we have studied, well, I don't know, I should say I haven't studied this, but it would be a really good question to, and I'm also asking you, Anna, because, or other people, has this been studied, or do we take technology for granted? I guess in what I have done so far is that I took it for granted. So, and I think many scholars that I know just take it for granted and see what happens. So when you work from home, it was expected that it gave you advantages, but now we also see work, family conflict, etc. But we didn't study yet under what conditions, which types of technology, and at what moments can be actually be profitable.
I think there's some research there, but from my understanding, it's typically about things you should not do. So you get these notifications: this is how much you were on your screen this week, my phone keeps saying.
Yeah.
Or you've been using this application too long, why don't you stop now? Which is of course not when I want to stop, because I'm in the middle of writing something or finally productive, and then I should stop. So I don't know, Anna, whether you have, I see Michael's hand raised, who probably has something to add to this. Maybe
I think there are some, there has been some research looking at, I suppose, at kind of slow technology or slow approaches, but I think you're right that the majority looks at sort of like how to be more productive, though, like that. It's not so much the reducing time pressure so much as get rid of these things and you'll be more productive. But Michael, do you want to come in at this point?
Yes, I need to apologize. I missed the talk. I always have two things scheduled on Thursday mornings my time, and I had to go to the other one for the first half hour. So if I'm being stupid and repetitious, I do apologize. I am thinking there are large organizations that have done various forms of remote for a very, very long time. I work at IBM, and so there was a period in IBM when IBM stood for I'm by myself, and people were commuting to work from their kitchens or their living rooms for years and years. Tom Erickson famously has never been co-located with any of the research groups that he's been part of at Apple or at IBM. And I think a lot of us are involved right now in remote mentoring. And if I were going to an IBM office, it would still be remote because the person with whom I'm co-mentoring is in the Southern Hemisphere. And we meet every week and blah, blah, blah. I think you're getting the idea. Before I worked at IBM, I worked in a telephone company. It was not very successful. It died. But the range of this telephone company in the United States went from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. It was 14 states. People who met, and this is just phone meetings, were adept at long distance collaboration. And similarly to the IBM story, people didn't really care where you were telecommuting from, as long as you. So I don't know if that's a fertile ground to do research in. Given that I didn't hear your talk, I should stop talking because you probably already talked about this.
No, thank you so much. Because what I also know from companies in the US, like Yahoo, for example, Yeah, but there are other ones. They also started with working from home far before other companies started with that. But their managers were not happy about that.
Mm.
So you know about these stories as well or not, Michael?
Indeed, I guess I would say, well, for two of us in the IBM Cambridge, Massachusetts US lab, if we went into the office, our manager would still be 400 kilometers away. And so we're remote no matter what, we sit next to each other. If pre-COVID, we were roommates. But the manager was still in a different state in the United States. So, and they're within some organizations, that's just commonplace. So, and I'm not saying, oh, all problems are solved, far from it, but managers have had years, and the company is deeply invested in training managers to be able to manage remotely. So again, it's a place to look, and they therefore choose what kinds of technologies they buy from vendors in order to connect people. And then back in the days when we were still making collaboration software, and we stopped, unfortunately, we sold that business. So I still don't know what I'm doing in the second part of my career at IBM. But in those days, we crafted the technology to support that kind of remote work. We would do things, I'm sorry, I'm going on for too long, but we would do things like, after a day's meeting with a potential customer, people would go online, put out a set of questions, and people would do what IBM then called a jam overnight in a particular piece of software. And the next morning, the people who were face-to-face with the customer would go back in and say, thank you for telling us what was on your mind. Last night, 75 IBMers brainstormed, here are some possible solutions. And none of us was co-located. In fact, many people were in their pajamas while they were doing it. So
I have to interrupt you,
yeah,
Michael,
please.
here, because I have, you know, in France and Germany, there are no possibilities that when you start a weekend, the manager is not allowed to send any email to you anymore.
Yes.
Can I ask a question, Chris, to Michael? Do you believe in this? That's totally different from what you are telling.
Oh, you are
Maybe
so
a short
right.
answer, Michael, then we can cover another question.
Very, very quickly, we think about many time zones. And so, and we're Americans, and so we always work. That's the short answer.
Yeah.
So Tanya, there's a couple of other questions that I'd like us to get to. So first of all, there's one from Heiko. Do you want to come in and read your question out?
Yeah, sure. So now, as we are hopefully approaching the end of the COVID pandemic, and where some people are going back to the office and other people are staying in a work from home scenario for whatever reason, like, you know, maybe they found that it's nice to work from home, but we will get into this area of hybrid meetings. So there's co-located people at the offices, and then there's remote people, just like Michael presented his situation at IBM. And I think for many organizations, this is going to be a major struggle. I mean, when we transitioned to all online, it was a struggle, but now going into the hybrid world, I mean, we see this as we are planning conferences now and all this kind of stuff. You know, this seems to really multiply the problems that you are facing. So how do you think, but looking at the time pressure, like, how do you think this will develop? Like, will people be jealous? Like, the office workers will be jealous of the work from home people because they have more time on their hands because they don't have to commute, or vice versa. You know, the people in the office get much more done because they have the proper technology, the proper setup, all this kind of stuff. What's your thought on this?
And what kind of work are you doing at home? And what kind of work are you doing at the office? So maybe you only have meetings at the office, and you need to meet your deadlines at home. And so we need to think about that as well. So what I showed about the influence of the colleagues who are working from home, the higher the percentage of colleagues working from home, the lower your productivity, and the lower your well-being, and the higher your work-family conflict. So we need to see. We also looked for, I can tell you, for a tipping point, you know, so 30 30% of people working from home works, but we didn't find that. So it is just like this. The more, the worse it becomes. So I can only speculate here. I'm not sure. What I know is I teach quite a lot. I like to teach. Hybrid teaching is awful. So I can imagine that that for teaching, I don't know what's going to happen. For working from home and these conferences online, well, they have a very positive side effect, and it is climate related, of course. So it is not nice to do this online, but it is much better for the next generation, you could say. So yeah, so maybe that is my answer. So maybe also here we should study the conditions under which it becomes profitable to have these conferences or work meetings. Yeah, hybrid, in a hybrid model.
Sounds terrible in a sense. I mean, meetings at work sounds nice that you're able to talk, but bringing your deadlines home with you and working on the things that have objective deadlines and time pressure in your personal space. I mean, we're doing it all the time at the moment, but if that would be the distinction, I only work on the high pressure tasks at home. I don't know.
It's interesting, Chris, because like that was my life pre-COVID. That's how I organized my time, and it was my preference, because I think it's interesting that we have to remember working in an office is not some utopian wonderful place, right? It's full of people that annoy us and interrupt us when we're trying to get our work done, and hence I found it much more useful to use the office for meetings and then the home for like thinking time and writing and so on. But we have another question about what it will be like as we move back to the physical world, which perhaps we can just slip that one in before we finish off today. So Pranjal, do you want to go next?
Yes, hi. So my question is building on to Michael and Heiko, but in my experience, that as now we are moving back to the physical world, during a COVID time, we have taken more work because, as you mentioned, that we had that perception we have more time and so we could do more work. But now we have to go back. So there's a transition happening. We need to travel and coming back. So there seems to be a time pressure, so that the things are getting prioritized, which are there in the physical world, but the prioritized and the responsibilities taken over the virtual are getting compromised. So how do you see this kind of scenario? Because now we're moving back to the physical world.
Maybe the first 2 months, and then we get used to it again.
Right.
So that would be my expectation. And you can ask about so that is now what indeed what you see. So when you have online meetings, you don't schedule 5 minutes in between, do you, Pranjal?
No.
Do you?
No.
So we just continue all the time. But are we more productive? I'm not sure about that. So we might take more work now to the office when we go to the office again, but maybe we now what we do is we schedule 1 hour meetings, 30-minute meetings. But actually, when you are at the office, you walk to a colleague and then you discuss something for 5 minutes. So we need to get used to that again, but it also saves time.
Right.
Does that answer your question or not?
Yeah, we are all in the same boat, so we will learn this particular phase. We are all in that transition mode. Let's see.
Yeah. So, and what I also think is that, well, that is as a sociologist. So we have been doing this for 2 years, but we have been doing other things, or the way we used to do it, for many more years. So we like to continue the things which are advantages to us, but other things we will. Yeah, and I already come to the office sometimes, and I notice that after 2 days, things are normal again. the conversations with the colleagues, etc. So yeah. Yeah.
We'll have to see how everything develops. Given the time, we've already overrun, but there's still time because we want to have some social time without recording. So I want to make sure there's still some time for that. So we'll continue maybe some of the questions or discussions, but I want to make sure that for the recording, thank you again, Tanja. I think this was a very inspiring discussion. Lots of community engagement. I like that you had questions for us. That's good. Yeah, this is good for each follow-up speaker. We are on Twitter. Well, some of us are. The conference is on Twitter. I'm not, but you can find us at CHIWORK Simp, and there you can check the events. Next week, same time, I'm again hosting, and then I'll be talking with Louis Chuang from Ludwig Maximilian University Munich and the Leibniz Institute. And we will be talking about neuroergonomics, or the brain at work. So a very different topic, but also interesting. Thank you again, Tanja. We can close the recording.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.